So, where is the success happening? You know, I gave a little bit of a dreary intro in terms of feeling a bit disappointed. Where is some of the success happening?
What I'm seeing in the tech sector as being positive is the young person right beside me, Fatima and Laura. I encourage them to join me on this panel because I'm sick of hearing my own voice around these issues. Wendy and I have been in the trenches for a long time, trying to drive more women into the tech sector. It's about 25 to 30 years for me as well. And I just took I am with ITAC, Information Technology Association of Canada, and we just took a female-led tech trade mission to Web Summit at Lisbon just 2 weeks ago. And I was lucky enough to meet Fatima there. She spoke at a panel that we organized a dinner event before the conference started. And I was just so impressed with her and how articulate she was about the issues. She's a female entrepreneur herself. She was speaking at Web Summit. She spoke on my panel, and she really is an advocate for the issues around getting more young women into the tech sector. And so I was just so impressed with her. Laura was supposed to be with us, but unfortunately was ill. But for me, one of the positive things that I'm seeing is that we have young champions who are really taking up the charge to get more women into tech. And the Girls 20 woman who was just over here, I really feel like that's where we could really make a difference, is really having those young female champions. And we heard a little bit about that around inclusion in the workplace as well. So I just wanted to start with kind of that positive note that for me, as someone who's been digging for a long time, having young role models, I think is super key. So I'll just start with that positive note.
Thank you so much for the kind words. You're just so lovely and positive. So let's start with the positive. You know, I think there are a lot of initiatives that are taking place now, like Move the Dial, where we're seeing more female entrepreneurs being profiled. We're hearing more about their challenges and their success stories. We just heard about Visa partnering with the Female Founder Collective to provide more tools, resources, and funding opportunities for female entrepreneurs. And of course, there's initiatives like ITAC, the tech delegations that are taking and giving people like me the opportunity who may not necessarily be able to afford, you know, paying for your flights and your accommodation and coming down to this 75,000 person conference, but really giving us the opportunity and the platform to, you know, get more exposure and access to global opportunities. But the average deal size for female-led companies last year was 5 million, and the average deal size for male-led companies last year was 12 million. And so while we definitely are seeing momentum and we definitely are seeing more initiatives coming through, like Stand Up Ventures and Female Founders, I still think we have a really, really long way to go. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot of challenges that we're facing, particularly where it comes to getting investment in early stage capital for female founders, which I think is one of the main reasons we're seeing a lot of roadblocks and women maybe not necessarily joining this industry. And there's just a lot of hurdles that we have to face. So I'm looking forward to talking about some of those challenges today and some initiatives that we can sort of work on together in order to overcome those.
And is that a Canadian stat?
That is the Canadian stat,
okay.
Yes.
And is it different elsewhere, or?
It definitely is different elsewhere, a lot worse in the US. Canada is fairly competitive with the rest of the world. So, you know, I think it's 14% of our executives are female, which is fairly competitive. But I think that, you know, we still have a really long way to go. And when I'm comparing, you know, Canadian stats, I'm not comparing them with the US or other places in the world. I think we need to compete within ourselves and set the standards to where we want to be.
I like to think about women in tech and women entrepreneurs slightly differently, primarily because I'm a women entrepreneur with no technical background at all, leading an AI company. I'm very optimistic about women in tech. And I think that we've hit an inflection point right now that is the result of a number of different pressure points that companies just can't get away from. So you have, of course, regulation and reporting requirements. You have the talent crunch, which is a really big one. Companies are being forced to look at non-traditional talent pools in order to staff up their teams. The trend that I'm most optimistic about, I think, is in the capital space. And if you follow the money right to the top, ironically, venture capital truly is controlled by pension funds in many ways. And the pension funds are starting to take steps where they basically require their venture capital asset managers to take a deeper look, a real look at diversity and inclusion in their investments. So not just how they allocate capital, but the companies that receive startup, scale up, bridge financing along the way. And so one small example was in Montreal yesterday, meeting with some senior leaders at BDC. And they recently incorporated into their funding agreements a requirement that companies and asset managers must have sexual harassment policies. And so it's a small step, and they're looking to do a lot more. We're actually partnered with BDC on a pretty bold initiative, but I do think that's something that you can't, if the people who give you money tell you you have to do something, nothing will make you move like that.
And are there actual number requirements, or is it a positive intention, or are there actual numbers to support that?
Yeah, so this initial policy, it is a screen. So you can't access capital unless you meet that requirement. The initiative that we're working on BDC with starts with creating a baseline of both cultural inclusion within their portfolio, but also representation of women and minorities. And once they have that baseline, they'll make the decision, what do we do with that data? Does it mean that we set a target that companies must meet before they qualify? Or is it more of a name and shame effort? So I think TBD, I'm hoping that they go bold.
And is going bold is quotas, is number?
I think it's, if not quotas, then certainly targets and tracking against that target with funding repercussions.
And Abby, tell us about your reason for optimism.
Yeah, I'm on. So, first of all, we know in user experience design that if you don't have diverse teams of individuals designing your products and your services and your spaces, then you don't get spaces and services and software that support diversity and inclusion. And so that's been a hallmark of the user experience design program at Laurier since we started. And I think partially that and other things that we've done have resulted in a student body that is 50% female, that is fairly balanced in terms of racialized minority, our share of people who are somewhere on spectrum. So we have a fairly diverse student population in our program. Obviously, we want more diversity, more everything. But the nice thing about UX, and I'm glad to hear that you're overseeing an AI company and you yourself are not from STEM, because I am, like you, I came from library science. Shout out to she was on the last panel, Mamdani. Rahima, wherever she is, she has a library science degree as well from the University of Toronto, and so one of the things that teaches you to do is to be able to speak languages across tech and humanity. So we teach information architecture, which essentially teaches folks how to design information systems from the user perspective. So it's human-computer interaction from a place of empathy rather than coming from a place of technology. So in user experience design, everything we do starts with the human. It starts with the user. And so I think that attracts to our program and to other programs like it, people who might not normally have thought of themselves as going into tech. And so, for example, a large chunk of our students, they come to us because they really liked graphic design in high school, and a large percentage of them are female. Their parents won't send them to university to study design or art, and they want them to get jobs. And there are so many jobs in user experience design, and they're very high paying. These are in tech companies as well as in non-tech companies that have tech aspects. So just about every industry we can imagine has a UX design portfolio at this point, and they're hiring like crazy, and they can't find enough people. And as a result, women and folks who maybe didn't have the math scores to go into computer science or engineering, or they didn't want to be computer scientists or engineers, have the ability to go into and work in these kind of tech areas, but from the user perspective, right? From a human perspective that puts empathy in the user first. And I think that appeals to a lot of young people. Certainly, we've doubled in the first 2 years of the program, and we're finding that the students are getting, job offers, and they're doing great work. So I'll leave it at that. That gives me hope.
So we all think it's great that there's non-tech people leading tech companies, and we've looked at all sorts of different creative approaches, but I think we all agree that we'd still love to see that pipeline move a little bit. And so could we maybe talk about 2 creative ideas in terms of how to move that pipeline? Because we're not doing it.
I can jump in there a little bit. So still on that alternative pipeline kind of access, because with our large employers at iTech, we're really trying to create some education and awareness that we need to open up their concept of how they're attracting talent to their tech organizations. And just to build on what both of you two had said, that we want STEM, we want more computer scientists who are female, we want more engineers who are female. For sure, we need to continue to build that, but also creating that programming within the school around supporting those of us who have arts degrees into tech. I really love to reinforce that STEAM concept. Wendy and I have been working on this for a long time, and I can kind of back up that story with my own arts degree. I was an English major. I went into publishing because that's what English majors did at that time in the 80s. And then I started to do some work around online learning resources. So that was the hook for me as an English major, to start to see the mashup of how tech then could be important to someone with strong communication skills, and thinking about my own career path as I was starting to develop those online resources. So I ended up going back to school to get a master's degree at Harvard and MIT to very specifically focus on those issues, gender technology. How can we attract young people? In my particular passion was more women in the tech sector, because I could see that was a real issue at that time, that young women weren't in the tech sector and they weren't designing and developing new technologies. So our famous example is the first voice activation software couldn't even pick up female voices, right? So that's back when I was in my 20s learning about that and thinking, what the, we've got to figure this out. So my degree was thinking about how we could attract more women into the tech sector. And then I was, I think, Wendy's first employee at the Diversity Institute, and really thinking about what are the kinds of programs we need to create to attract those women into the tech sector who may have strong communication skills, but how do we make those hybrid programs where they're learning tech skills, but they maintain and cultivate strong communication skills? So that was the background to the program that Wendy developed at the Diversity Institute called ADAPT, and iTech was a supporting partner, and we are now working on a project together to encourage employers to access young, I guess, underrepresented groups who have strong communication skills, but need some upskilling in the digital side of things, digital skill sets. So with some training on the digital side, you then are tapping into an entire new pool of great candidates who could be then hired by my employers. And so that's my piece of the puzzle, to work with Wendy to then educate my employers around thinking about attracting this alternative pipeline of great talent, people with strong soft skills, and I know we hate that word, but great communication skills, but also have been upskilled or reskilled with that digital, those digital skills, and then they can be brought into organizations and become part of a great, have a great tech career. So that's just one. We could go on and on about that, but that's one example.
Is there anyone here from Specialist Earn? No? Well, shout out. They're also one of the partners in the Diversity Institute, and I was really grateful to be able to reach out and work with them. So Specialist Earn works to place people who are on spectrum or who have other cognitive challenges in tech companies where they actually prove to be quite good employees. And I have a number of students in my program who are on spectrum, and we have a 12 to 16-month co-op, and I was a bit concerned that I might not have as easy a time placing those students as I have placing all of my others. So reaching out to Specialist Earn was enormously helpful, and I see this as one of the things that it's going to move the dial forward. When I think about inclusion, and diversity, I don't just think about my young female students. I'm also thinking about my students who have both visible and invisible disabilities and cognitive challenges.
Laura?
So one thing my company does is we collect data from all kinds of companies, especially tech, on what the pipeline looks like. So within an organization, what % at each level are women, racial and ethnic minorities, people with a disability, et cetera. And the bottleneck that is increasingly clear to us is those first 3 or 4 years, sometimes even less, within a company. So I actually think a lot of schools are graduating an ever-growing number, for one example, of women. So I actually think that end of the pipeline, universities are doing really great work to attract and train women engineers and STEAM grads. But I think it's within those first 3 years you see that women and ethnic minorities attrit at 2 to 3 times kind of your white male coder. Yeah. And when I probed on this, I connected with the heads of women in computer science at Ryerson and U of T, and both of them said the same thing. Listen, our grads, you can't get away from everyone has an anecdote about being harassed at a tech company. And so we're increasingly, they said my friends are moving into consulting, into the banks, and away from tech companies. So to me, that's a very clear problem that we need to solve. A couple ideas on how to solve it. One thing that we did early on is we developed a certification program that looks at how inclusive a company is and gives that company a score. And it's based on real data, anonymously reported by employees on whether there's harassment in the workplace, whether different viewpoints are attracted and valued, et cetera. And so what we did in partnership with 111 is we analyzed all 50 of the companies, some of Canada's biggest scale-up companies in their community, and we certified the ones that, according to employees, have a really, really great culture. And the idea is, highlight those companies for new female grads so that their first experience at a tech company is a positive one, where they're mentored and sponsored, and that sets their career. And so you keep them in the pipeline. That's just one very small.
How do you measure? How do you measure culture? Like, how do you decide which company has good culture? Are you surveying their employees? Just curious how that benchmarking.
Yeah, great question. Because I think the perennial, pushback is like, how can you measure culture? Yeah. Like, it's so complicated and nuanced and whatever. I'm sure that that's right in many ways. What we did is we developed a pulse survey with 2 free text components, and they're designed around a set of key performance indicators like kind of a culture of inclusion, access to networks, sexual harassment, flexible work, recruiting and hiring, et cetera. And so what we do is, again, we collect anonymous, protected data from employees, where they give us very candid feedback on how their company is performing, and we convert that feedback into a score that we benchmark against their peers. So if all of the women at company A are saying, great place to work, I have a sponsor, I'm being promoted at the same rate, and all the employees at company B are saying, yep, I had a harassment incident over the last year, like that's a pretty good, and then we, not to get too deep into the tech, but we have a social media scanner that uses AI to keep track of how the public is perceiving, and that goes into the score.
I can do a hot pursuit on that topic too, because Microsoft, as you may know, just published their diversity and inclusion report last week, US-based, but our Canadian Microsoft Canada, I spoke with them last week just to talk about that, and they, for the very first time, not only published their metrics, their numbers, but they published their inclusion index, and they had conducted something very similar with their employees, which was like an index of questions to survey their employees, which now they have benchmark for, to ask those questions around inclusion. How do you are you being included? Do you feel, all those feely questions? Is information being shared with you? Are you being asked your opinion? All those things, which I think is really important to be asking those questions continually of your employers. So the numbers are great, the data is great about where we're making improvements around stats, around attracting diverse candidates, et cetera. But if you're not taking the pulse, as you said, or the temperature of the environment and how everyone's feeling, then you really can't make changes to course correct. So I was impressed that Microsoft, as a large organization, is actually publishing their data publicly, and then of course that means accountability, and that's the key. Then they have to next year report and say how they made a difference, and so that's an important start.
Yeah, Fatima, talk to us a bit about the pipeline.
So when I started Quill, I sat down with my male business partner, and we picked 2 policies that I've been impacted with throughout my career, and we wanted to be very intentional about those 2 policies. So the first one we decided to tackle was equal pay. And so what we did was I actually borrowed a policy from John Mcgee, who is the CEO of Whole Foods. In 1986, he made compensation data available to everybody in the organization. So you can look up everyone's salaries right up to the CEO level. And what that ensured was reducing, wage gaps, of course, but also ensuring that everybody is paid according to merit rather than gender, socioeconomic status, or personal biases. But also it promoted healthy competition. And, we talk about this all the time. We need more women in tech. We need more minority engineers. We need more LGBTQ representation at the executive level. But it still is a little bit confusing to me why some of our most innovative industries, like our technology industry, are also our most homogenous. So that was the first policy that we decided to tackle. And at Quill, we are making financial data open to everybody. And there's complete financial transparency. Everybody knows how much I make, which is currently 0. And they know what every employee coming in will be making. They'll know how much money the company is making. We want complete transparency there because we want people to know that we take that very seriously. And then the second policy that we wanted to tackle was maternal wall bias, which is the hidden presumptions and prescriptive stereotypes that women who have children, are less committed to their careers just because they have family responsibilities. And, while I've been raising capital, I've been in hundreds of investor meetings, and I have a male business partner, and the types of questions that we get asked are very different. They have a really hard time understanding why I own 80% of the company while he only owns 20%, which I feel like if the situation was reversed would never be brought up. They always want to know what my long-term future plans are in terms of having children, and while they may not think it's, publicly acceptable to come out and ask me that, they'll go around it in a different way. Like, what are your personal goals in the long-term future? Are you seeing someone? And they'll go around about it. And my business partner will never be asked these questions. And so maternal wall bias is definitely a very real issue. And so that was something that we wanted to address at Quill. And And so we borrowed a policy from Netflix. So again, we're not reinventing the wheel. And their policy is new parents get unlimited leave after the birth or adoption of a child, and full pay and benefits. And they've opened up the policy to both sets of parents, and promoting to both sets of parents and encouraging both sets of parents to take this policy, this leave, because we want to reduce the social stigma that it should be women who are stepping away from their careers for 9 months. And the responsibility, I think, should be distributed equally, or at least at the very least there should be that option. And so those are the two policies that we implemented at Quill and that we were very intentional about. But of course there's so many that Denise and Laura both touched on. There's softwares now like Mesh Diversity and Textio that help your recruiting processes become more fair and diverse. We use Textio at Quill as well, so we make sure that all of our job descriptions are not gearing and not biased towards a particular group of people. And oftentimes the bias is so unconscious that they'll pick up things that I would have never even thought about. And so there is very much an algorithm there in place that really makes a difference. And so I could go on and on all day about different tactics to use, but those are my two.
So on behalf of all investors, I just want to say sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
I was gonna, those are great, by the way. And I just wanted to add that one of the things we do is we take our students out to visit UX teams at various companies, large companies, I won't name them. And one of the things that we see quite frequently at some of the top companies to work for is that they have 24/7 food, and it's free, and you can get your dry cleaning done there, and there's basketball courts and axe throwing areas and all of this. It's great and fun, but I was really pleased to see that some of the young women in my program said, where's the daycare? And these are women who are, not parents yet, but they're already thinking in terms of, okay, that's a lot of fun, and I can see that would keep you here 24/7, which is another issue altogether about life-work balance, but they're not addressing the needs that I'm going to have in the next few years. Yeah.
Can I also pick up on, because I think one theme that we need to reiterate is intentionality. Mm-hmm. And to your first question, where is success happening among our clients? The ones that are becoming incredibly diverse and inclusive and then using that as a business advantage are the ones who treat it like a business priority. Yeah. And so they're not, the way that we work with them, they're not throwing darts and saying, we're going to, this week it's Me Too, so we'll do a sexual harassment thing. And next week it's someone had a panel, and so we'll sponsor that. The way that they approach it is they say, what is our baseline? It's a very, we work with them in a very Microsoft-like approach, which is identify diversity, which is an outcome, and then figure out what drivers are missing. Mm-hmm. So what cultural dynamic is at play that's preventing you from reaching that outcome? And then tackle the heck out of that problem area. So at the end of the day, you shouldn't be, you don't need to do, I think there's a lot of confusion and fatigue around diversity because it feels like such a big problem, mm-hmm. and where do I even begin? But if you sit down like any other business problem, you create your baseline, you figure out your biggest opportunity areas, and then you're intentional about how you solve those, mm-hmm. while tracking impact and while course correcting when needed. Like that's how one of our clients within 9 months had doubled the number of women in their next hiring cycle. It's a Toronto tech company, scale up, very well known, and increased the number of ethnic minorities by 1.5 in 9 months. So kind of don't tell me it can't be done, and don't tell me there's low-hanging fruit, because we're seeing some really great momentum.
And just to, if I can build on what Laura was saying, because that's the feedback that I'm getting as well with our companies, that obviously you've got to have that leader who really believes in diversity and inclusion, and frankly, hopefully is losing sleep over it just as much as the bottom line for his or her annual report numbers. They have to go to bed at night thinking, my company is not going to innovate or succeed or grow if I don't think about diversity inclusion. And we brought up all the reasons why with millennials, et cetera. But so I think that you've got to have that leadership really buy in and be kept up at night about it. But all of the leadership and that frozen middle everyone, I think, has to have within their core objectives as employees, have that accountability built right into how they're incentivized and how they deliver on those objectives. And if you don't, it just does become a little bit make-believe, I think. So it's that intentionality, and it's that really baking it right into the accountability and how you prosper within that organization, and how every individual has to take accountability. As Wendy was saying, you can't be the bystander. You have to actually be contributing, and your success is measured on how everyone contributes to the culture and the bigger picture, I think.
And in Laura, like, I really liked the point you said, it's not about throwing darts. Like, one of the biggest things for me in this industry is it feels like a lot of companies, it's a diversity quota check. Like, did we do this tactic? Check. Did we hold a seminar? Check. You know, groups like Stand Up Ventures and female founders, they're great, and I do think that we need to be giving more access to female founders, but I also worry that are we further isolating the two groups even more? You know, even this conference, you know, I think I look around and it's about diversity and inclusion. I don't see that many men here, and you know,
There were more, I think some.
maybe, and kudos.
This is actually pretty good.
And kudos to the gentleman who came out today. I think this is definitely not a we problem, it's a community problem. You know, there's been so many studies showing that diverse teams lead to better financial performance as well, and we really need to be focusing in on that. But I think, you know, I'd like to see equal representation at the table, and I'd love to see more, not just women talking about this issue and it being a diversity quota check, but realizing that it's also just better for your financial performance.
And you know what I think? Is changing the game. And Denise, your point, we want to see CEOs kept up at night because of this issue. I think all of the carrot incentives around innovation, design, and revenue growth, et cetera, that's great. At the end of the day, what I think is keeping up CEOs on this issue is fear. And the game changer, in my mind, is social media. And so one recent example I'm sure many of you have heard of is a Toronto-based company was just taken down in about a month.
I was waiting for someone to bring up this story on the podcast.
Tell us the story. Can you tell us the story?
Yeah, so the story is a Toronto-based, very high potential fintech company was just about to raise a $20 million Series B round when through Sun Life, when a former employee wrote a Medium post about her experience a year prior being sexually harassed. That was picked up by Twitter. And like dominoes, all of the investors pulled out within about 2 weeks, and the company shut down. And another similar example from the US that I actually wasn't aware of until our social media tracker caught it is an asset manager called Fisher Investments. One of the biggest GPs in the US controls, I think, $20 billion of capital. Their CEO made a sexist comment at an industry roundtable, and honestly, I've heard way worse than what this guy said. And within, I think, about 3 weeks, $4 billion of capital had pulled out from his fund. And at the end of the day, you cannot, like, nothing will, I actually can't think of another, barring like a financial crisis, I can't think of another thing that could happen to your company that could bring you down quicker with so little control.
So name one male tech leader losing sleep about this issue for the right reasons.
Ben Zifkin at Hubba, he has put so many initiatives in place, like Ladies Learning Code. He's their biggest backer. He, you know, is constantly championing and supporting, you know, women learning to code, you know, giving them the tools and resources to get on their feet, career change, pivot, equal pay. He definitely is losing sleep over this, and Hubba is definitely a company in the Toronto tech community that has taken a lot of initiatives and strides to improve diversity quotas. And this Planswell story that, and I'm going to say Planswell because I want everyone to look up this story, has actually really created a huge divide in our tech community. 50% of the people out there are like, this is, you know, when you read this story, the punishment doesn't equate to the consequences, you know, and then 50% of the tech community are totally on board with the consequences and what happened. And I think you're right. It's completely fear. It's not about being intentional, thinking about why do we want diverse teams, but it's more like if we don't have diverse teams, then we'll be the next PR story, we'll be the next media story. And so there is a lot of fear right now, and not just the tech community, but it's also something that I think about constantly as well. So it's definitely, it's that particular story in Toronto has really shaken up our tech community.
And whether or not you agree with it, like whatever way you come down on whether it was the right reaction, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And this trend is not going away, and venture capitalists are taking note. So kind of like it or not, I think that pressure is coming, and it's something, and to your earlier question, like what CEOs are doing this well, I think Toby Lutke at Shopify, massive role model. One of our clients came to us, scale up, Toronto-based, and the reason that they paid a lot of money really early on to work with us is they said, we're scaling quickly. A year from now, we want to be Shopify, we don't want to be Uber. And we know that we need to bake this in early on, or when that scandal inevitably happens, we're screwed.
Love it.